didn't think to ask. I just assumed that it would be
About it.
like.
We're always ready for everything.
Okay.
That's the trick. Just get ready for those.
I didn't think to ask because I was like, some places I go to universities and I'm like, let me make sure I ask. But I'm like, wait a Mila, it'll be,
So you're gonna open your slides, just plug this in. It's not going to be on screen now. I'll make sure it's going to be there once we're set. So just make sure you use it. Oh yeah, it takes time. Sometimes just make sure you use it as not a mirror display, but use it as a second display. So. Okay. Do you mind if you go into your settings, if possible?
You can do it.
I can do it?
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Please.
Settings. Not Finder settings, just system settings. I'm not the best Mac user.
It's display.
Yeah.
No, that's
No,
not. You're
I'm not in the
you're
settings.
in Finder.
Oh my god. Yeah. Okay. Display.
That's not either.
Displays. There you go. And then let's just make sure that we're not mirroring, but using it as a second display. Okay. Perfect. So now if we go back into now you can start your slideshow.
You're spending thing. Okay.
Yeah. If it's not already started, maybe it's already started. Slideshow with presenter view, and just make sure okay, perfect. I'll just put it on the screen for 2 seconds.
Okay,
so
that's fine.
we make sure.
Great. Yes. Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Hello, hello.
Good, Catherine?
Bonsoir tout le monde. On va commencer en 2 minutes. We're going to start in 2 minutes. Bonsoir tout le monde. Bienvenue à la conférence de Mila. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Mila. Welcome to the conference Protecting Human Rights in the Age of AI. My name is Anna. I'm going to be your MC for tonight. I only have 2 very short logistical points to share with you before we get started. We're going to have during the panel conversation, you will also have an opportunity to engage with our panelists via Slido, as well as mics here. So we're going to go back and forth between Slido questions and the audience questions. So you have a little barcode on your program. So once we have time for questions, you can go to that and add your question and also vote up or down other questions. So just to for those who haven't used Slido before. Other point, this door is the only door you can get in and out. And for some reason, it closes really loudly. So if you do need to get up and go out, just be careful to close it carefully behind you. And then washrooms are just to the right. So that's all in terms of logistics. And it's my pleasure to introduce you now to Valérie Pisano, President and CEO of Mila.
Bonjour à tous, bienvenue. On behalf of myself, of Yoshua Benjo, our founder, of the 1,500 people that we consider members of our community here at Mila, it is an incredible honor to welcome you to Mila, to Montreal, to Canada. For many of you, you've traveled from afar. Je voudrais commencer par reconnaître que Mila est située sur des terres autochtones non cédées. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land we gather on today is traditional, unceded indigenous lands of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation, who are really the custodians of this space, and we thank them for allowing the conversation we're having today. Protéger les droits humains à l'ère de l'IA, protecting human rights in the age of AI. A mere 5 years ago, we inaugurated this space. We inaugurated Mila. And of course, back then, as is still true today, we were incredibly inspired by the promises and the possibilities of AI. We gathered here because we wanted to create an exceptional environment for the advances of this science and find ways to bring it to the world, both for economic innovation, but also for social good. And even a couple of years ago, before much of what happened in the last few months transpired, there was a sense that there would come a time where there would be a bigger conversation about this technology. It wasn't quite clear what. Back then, we talked a bit about ethics, responsible AI was in the air. But what was really clear, even when we put the first logo on this space, was that when that day came, number one, we would take a very clear stand for the right of every human being on Earth to be and to belong and to become. So we would take a stand for human rights. And we would be, beyond taking a stand, we would be participants in that conversation. We'd have people who had put energy behind that. And, if that was the role that was called upon us, we would convene people. We would host this conversation that we truly believed would be an important one. This, of course, speaks to the conviction and values of Yoshua, and I just want to salute your courage over the last year. It takes a lot of courage to do what you did and to speak to the complexity of this technology you've given your whole life's work to, and to be one of the leading voices in this conversation. And it also speaks to the incredible conviction and dedication of the three co-chairs of the event, Benjamin Prudhomme, Catherine Régis, and Nathalie Smouha. They didn't have to do this, by the way. This was three incredibly inspired, beautiful souls who just knew this was the right thing to do, who raised their hands and say, in addition to everything else that is my day job, why don't we try to do this? It feels like it's the right thing to do, the right place to do it, and a really important conversation to have. And so I want to thank you all and just say how honored and inspired we are that so many of you are making the time, so many of you have traveled here in person, and bonjour, salutations to everyone who's joining us online also. And this coming together of civil society, international organizations, academia, eventually policymakers, and some of you are in the room, is so important for this critical conversation, one of maybe the most important of our times. So thank you for being here. We're honored and really looking forward to everything that transpires in the next few days. Nous avons l'honneur et le très grand privilège d'accueillir M. Amandeep Singh Gill, secrétaire général adjoint des Nations Unies et envoyé technologique. We are honored and incredibly privileged to welcome Amandeep Singh Gill, Undersecretary General of the United Nations and Technological Envoy. Drawing on his engineering background and rich experiences as a science diplomat and in multilateral affairs, Mr. Singh Gill will kick off the conference with opening remarks, speaking on the critical role, of course, of human rights as one of the key pillars in the UN's development and deployment of technology.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Bonsoir à tout le monde. Professor Yoshua Bengio, dear Yoshua, Valérie, Benjamin, and the Mila equipe, fellow members of the UN Secretary General's AI Advisory Body, Dr. Alondra Nelson, and Virginia, where are you? There you are, Virginia Dignam, and Mariche Shake, who will join us tomorrow. Delighted to be here. I have heard so much about the work that this institute has done over the past 5 years, really shaped the narrative in a good way on AI, and therefore I'm very, very happy to be here in person and share some thoughts with you. Essentially, I want to present today some of the work that the UN Secretary General's Advisory Body on AI is doing, the context in which that work is happening, and what we can expect in the coming months and how you can all contribute to that. And of course, the anchor today, not only for this event, but for us in the United Nations, is the protection and promotion of human rights. Human rights in all their diversity. Human rights as they've been envisaged through the ages and captured in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, whose 75th anniversary we celebrated recently. And that's a touchstone that's essential for us as these increasingly powerful technologies seep across the world, reshape our lives, our personal lives, how we interact with others, so our societal interactions, how our economies, how our political economies are, and how our governance institutions are. So this is an across-the-board impact that we are dealing with. There's no longer any doubt that we are dealing with a powerful new wave of technologies that's going to reshape our world. And therefore, we all feel a bit bewildered, and we need a guiding light. And the best guiding light we have today is human rights, human agency, self-determination, as some people call it, and democracy and the rule of law. So with these touchstones, we can't go wrong. But translating these touchstones into practical guidance, impactful institutional responses is the task that we are engaged on in the advisory body and in many other forums across the UN. UNESCO with its AI ethics framework, ITU with its work on standards, on leveraging AI for good, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights with its business and human rights principles, and so on. Why did the Secretary General set up this advisory body? Because it's the right moment, and also because you have a number of governments and international organizations and institutions, G7, G20, the UKI Safety Summit, engaged on this issue. So how can we bring value to those conversations? So that was a motivating factor. And importantly, we have a political opportunity this year with the Summit of the Future, where a global digital compact is to be adopted. So how can we capture these conversations, this analysis, these insights into potential decisions for our governments so that we are not behind the curve? We've seen that with the internet, we've seen that with social media, we've seen that with a number of other technologies. We can't afford to be late on this. So this is the moment, and that's why the work of the advisory body is so important. So what is the stage at which the advisory body is? It's just released an interim report that has done a landscape analysis. And this landscape analysis is from the perspective of 39 members from 33 countries, all 5 regions of the globe, across different stakeholder sectors, areas of expertise, civil society, academia, private sector, government. And they have looked at the landscape. They have looked at risks and challenges from a balanced perspective, not just today's risks or risks deep into the future, but all kinds of risks. Not just dressing up a list of risks, but also looking instead at risks from the perspective of vulnerability of people, of the planet, and then looking at opportunities and enablers. Because this, as an engineer, I'm very excited about the potential of these technologies. You know, when we coded back in the 1980s, what we understood AI to be at that time, it's so different today, and that's so exciting. And I shouldn't say anything more in front of a Turing Award winner about technology, but there is the opportunity side. And in the UN, we already see some application, the sustainable development side, the humanitarian response side, improving our own efficiency in terms of allocation and use of resources, and so on. But we won't get to those opportunities without a significant shift in how we do our business. So existing business models are not going to deliver on those opportunities. And the existing concentration of tech and economic power is not going to help with that. So 6 to 7 companies are not going to deliver us from our problems. Maybe 770 million can. So we need more diverse participation in the AI innovation wave. And we also need to ensure that the enablers are in place. And we typically speak of enablers as data, compute, and talent, but there's also governance as an enabler so that we retain the trust, we do the right thing. And there's international cooperation as an enabler. So if you want to train a model across borders, on different kinds of data sets, without international cooperation, that's not going to happen. So what are the kind of enablers? The interim body has given some thought to that. In the next phase, it'll go deeper into it with some case studies, a hypothetical Kenyan startup called Kiko. What does it need to be able to compete, participate in the AI economy of the future on equal terms, not as a recipient, but as a solution maker in its own right. Then coming to the governance side, and I want to close with that, there is, as you know, different kinds of governance responses coming from the private sector, a lot of that in the nature of self-regulation, some of it encouraged, the White House commitments, for instance. So this is important, urgent sometimes because you can move faster there, but it's not sufficient. So you need to have national level or regional, as in the case of the European Union, responses, law-based responses, governance frameworks where you can either look at tiered risks or bring some existing legislation to bear on the behavior of participants in the AI research, development, deployment cycles. Then you have a third layer, which is the international layer. I mentioned the human rights norms at the beginning, the UDHR, the core conventions, the Convention on Civil and Political Rights, for instance. So what is the role of international norms and institutions? And Alondra has helped the advisory body deepen this analysis of how we can ground AI governance in international norms. But going beyond that, what kind of institutions are needed in the future? We've all seen that with previous technology waves. When we started the atomic age, the Trinity test in that July in 1945. So you didn't have any institutions. It took several decades for the institution to come in place. There's an institutional ecology around the management of technologies. Sometimes it comes about randomly. Sometimes it's accelerated or decelerated by events. The Cuban Missile Crisis was one of those points. But then can we be more thoughtful about the institutional response at the international level? So the advisory body has landed a set of principles to guide us in that institutional design, inclusivity, for instance, governance in the public interest, and so on. And then it has landed a set of functionalities, 7 for now, which the advisory body believes need to be performed at the international level, in addition to those 2 other very consequential levels of governance. That includes a regular horizon scanning, risk assessment, functionality. That includes aspects of interoperability. How do we make different risk management frameworks work together so that there are no gaps in governance? And that also includes some more robust functionalities that may require more political capital to get across the line. Now, to come to my conclusion, the body is going out and seeking feedback in New York from member states, Slovenia at a UNESCO conference, again from member states, Davos from different stakeholders, the World Government Summit in Dubai. Here, there are some of us here to listen to you, to learn from you. There is a public call for comments, and comments are coming in. We have 2 more in-person meetings, at least full in-person meetings in March and in May, and several deep dives into areas like future of work, standards, open source, direction of technology, so that we can refine our analysis, come up with a final report by the summer, and get to the important work then of thinking about decisions and operationalizing the recommendations. So I want to thank Yoshua, Valerie, and the Milad team for the opportunity and look forward to spending some time bilaterally with some of you over the next 2 days. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Dans le cadre de la discussion du panel d'ouverture de ce soir, nous sommes aussi ravis d'avoir Mme Alondra Nelson avec nous. A policy advisor and acclaimed academic researcher and author, Alondra Nelson is the Harold F. Linder Professor of Social Science at the Institute for Advanced Study, an independent research center in New Jersey. Dr. Nelson, who also served as acting director at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy and deputy assistant to U.S. President Joe Biden. She will draw on her interdisciplinary expertise in science, technology, medicine, social inequality for her keynote address. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Valerie, Yoshua, for the invitation. You know, this is a legendary place in just 5 years, and I'm delighted to be here, and really want to honor the community of practice that you have created in your time here, a community of researchers, and honor the fact that you have expanded what is mostly a technical community to really confront the big issues of our time and the big issues that the work here produces. It is that kind of opening of tents and communities, expansion of communities are going to be so important to us getting this right potentially. Thank you also very much to the co-chairs for having me. Let's see, we've got a little thing happening here. Okay, and Yoshua, I want to say, we met many years ago. You don't know this. I was a juror for CFAR in the year before Mila was established. So you owe me everything for, just wanted to make sure you knew that publicly. Okay, so I am going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to say a little bit about Lawrence Lessig. I'm going to talk about actually the UN Declaration on Human Rights, because I think it's important. I mean, one of the things that we did, I co-chaired one of our subcommittees for this UN AI body, thinking about international law and norms. And I went back to the Universal Declaration, the UN Declaration on Human Rights, and we're thinking through that, and I'll take you through some of my thinking there. And I've also, in this process, found myself over the last sort of 14 months where things have just been in a whirlwind for those of us who care about science and technology policy and the future of our global society. Thinking quite a lot about foundational documents, about those moments when we can agree on the things that we care about the priorities that we share, even over and against hot wars and polarization and these sorts of things. So as I began thinking about my comments for today, I went back to 3 texts. One I'm going to talk about in length, but 2 I'll just begin with. The first was Martin Luther King Jr.'s Nobel lecture in December of 1964. And I think, people don't often appreciate how much he talked about science and technology and about how we should think about science and technology. So I pulled a couple of paragraphs from his speech here that I wanted to share with you. Modern man has brought this whole world to an awe-inspiring threshold of the future. He has reached new and astonishing peaks of scientific success, produced new machines that think, 64, instruments that peer into the unfathomable ranges of interstellar space, right? We'll go down. Yet in spite of these spectacular strides in science and technology, and still unlimited ones to come, something basic is missing. There is a sort of poverty of spirit which stands in glaring contrast to our scientific and technological abundance. The richer we have become materially, the poorer we have become morally and spiritually. We have learned to fly the air like birds and swim the sea like fish, but we have not yet learned the simple art of living together as brothers. So I wanted to begin our conversation this evening with that. Another kind of cornerstone that I wanted to talk about was, it's a book from my field. I'm a sociologist of science and technology. This is Syula Jasanoff's Designs on Nature from 2005. And one of, I think, relevant for this conversation this evening, one of the things about this book is that Jasanoff talks about all the different ways that national communities make decisions about the same policy issues, right? So I wanted to go from King's aspirational prophetic language to the sort of realpolitik that Jasanoff writes about, in which, you know, in this book she's writing about Germany, France, the EU, and the US, and how they're confronting, you know, a decade ago or 2 decades ago of new and emerging technologies in which we're having to sort of think fast on our feet about how we're going to regulate them. And policy issues are the same. Arguably, all democracies, similar kind of goals and aspirations for their communities, and yet the way that they approached them was radically different. So I offer that as just a cautionary tale. I mean, the work of trying to think globally around governance is hard, in part because we've got baked-in norms about how we do governance and technology policy that already exist. Not impossible, and this is why I'm so delighted to be working under Amandeep's leadership on the UN AI Advisory Body, but very hard work. And this is what I'll spend more time talking about as I move forward to say a few words about the UN Declaration of Human Rights to End. So this is Lawrence Lessig's very important book, Code and Other Laws of Cyberspace. He wrote a version 2 of this book. I went back, I like to go back to the 1999 one, because the book that he published in 1999 was a kind of cri de coeur. It was written in a kind of sense of urgency. Can be a very kind of dry legal book in some ways, quite analytic, but was trying to sort of wrap his head around things that we are also, I think, trying to reckon with. And there's a way in which this moment, I mean, we often talk about, and I think Amandeep invoked, or maybe Valerie invoked, you know, social media. We think about the sort of technology immediately preceding that we wrestled with to try to regulate. And it's good to go back to Lessig, who was thinking about the advent of the internet, the advent of cyberspace, and the sort of regulatory, I think Amandeep used the word bewilderment, the bewilderment around what you might do about it in that moment. So we've had these kinds of moments in the policy space before where we felt utterly bewildered by what we might do with a new technology. So some similarities here, you know, that this is from Lessig. This is my paraphrase of Lessig, that we're dealing with a technological phenomenon that's new, that's unwieldy, and that has a sense of foreignness, in the sense that it's foreign to the law or foreign to policy. We don't know where to put it. That there were ongoing debates during this time about whether something so unwieldy could be regulated. We've heard that one recently, huh? He lands in Code on a strategy about tracking technological phenomena, paying attention to the changes that they might bring, to the forms that they might take. And some of the work that I did in Washington, it was around the use cases and the applications, and particularly when you're dealing with general purpose, advanced AI, high capable AI systems and tools. You want to be able to think about sort of how they might be used to get traction on governance. He also talks about a recognition that business models take shape, and that's one of the ways that, one of the more powerful use cases, and one of the ways that the affordances of technology become narrower. So even if the initial discovery has a sort of breadth of possibilities, the sort of turning of them into product, right, we're living in this now, sort of narrows our possibilities for what we might do with them. So again, this is all Lessig, 1999. So he puts these sort of insights under a larger umbrella around code. So for him, the code, which is like the technological affordances, are the kind of laws of the internet, right? So code is to internet as norms and laws are to society, is basically the argument that he makes in 1999. What I want to suggest that we're facing is something different. There's a lot to learn from Lessig, and I shared those slides about those 4 bullets because he was quite prescient in some of the ways that he thought about what to do with new and emerging technologies that are actually kind of infrastructure for society and how to begin to think to get a grasp on them. But what we're dealing with is something more like codes plus norms plus laws equal society, right? Like, so it's not, so Lessig was very clear that, you know, code is to norms as, you know, as internet is to society, that these were kind of different things, that these were not kind of one and the same. So maybe right now we're dealing with something that they're sort of all, you know, together sort of comprise society. Certainly we need to think about how norms and laws can sort of govern society, can govern code, and can govern the internet. And so to the question, I was given for my talk, how relevant are human rights in the age of AI? I would say very relevant indeed. So I want to go back to some work that I did at the White House. I'm speaking in my personal capacity completely. I was just talking to Benjamin about what it's like to come out of government and like try to find your voice again. But reflecting on the work that I did there. Part of what we did at OSTP, it was create a policy document called the Blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. Bill of Rights is a foundational text of the United States Constitution. It offers sort of foundational rights and freedoms to members of the American public. I pulled this slide because we announced the process that we were going to be doing in Wired, and hearing the Bill of Rights, Wired created this kind of very old-fashioned text around it. So this sense that there are kind of, even with the sort of fast winds, the whirlwind of new technologies, foundational things that we care about that we can hark back to. And so I would say, in kind of contrast to Lessig, who was right about so much, that those norms and those laws that he shunted off to the side of society as opposed to the side of internet are the things in this moment that we need to really guide us, much as Amandeep said as well. So the AI Bill of Rights was released in October of 2022, and then it was codified in President Biden's parts of it executive order in October of 2023. And it was distilled from engagement with lots of people from various sectors of US society, industry, academia, civil society. And it advanced 5 propositions, which are here: that AI systems should be safe and effective, that the public should know that they're being used, that there should be some modicum of data privacy, should be protected from algorithmic discrimination, and the like. But it was very much aimed at a kind of US audience and a US sort of pattern of using the Bill of Rights. So I don't know how much you know about US history, but you could think about somebody like Ralph Nader, who had a consumer's Bill of Rights. During the Obama administration, there was a patient's Bill of Rights. So harking back to a foundational document of the United States Constitution to make rights claims in the present, and to make aspirational claims about the society that we want to live in the present, has been very much a rich part of US political culture. But how do we think about, so this is in a civil rights framework, civil liberties framework that's distinctive in some ways to the US. And so the question then became, for us today, is sort of how to think about the human rights piece of that larger kind of global commitments that we have made as a global community. So Amandeep mentioned the work that we've been doing together on the High-Level Advisory Board on Artificial Intelligence. And it's been a source of great encouragement for me, in part because, as I said at the top, in a world rife with division and polarization, it's hard to forget that a global community has agreed on things before. And one of the things that we agreed upon in 1948 was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So I wanted to, in the philosophy here, I think that we can take up for AI governance is that there are anchoring things that we are committed to as a global community at a time when, I'll speak for myself, Amandeep, when the UN General Assembly has a hard time voting on anything unanimously. There was a prior time in which we were able to agree on a code, on a different code from Lessig's code, right? On a kind of social algorithm, on a way that we wanted to live as a global community together. And so I just wanted to pull, I pulled 5 articles from the UN Declaration of Human Rights because I wanted to show them to you, and I wanted you to think about them in the context of AI governance, because I think they have deep relevance in ways that we, I think, don't think about. If you think about it as a document that's sort of set off in amber that doesn't have any kind of real life relevance for how we're thinking about policy issues today. So Article 3, everyone has a right to life, liberty, and the security of person, right? Thinking about existential risks, thinking about safety risks, public safety risks around AI might be one way to think through this. Article 5, no one should be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Similar way of thinking through that. I think also resonant, certainly for some of the current and near-term harms that are being experienced both with predictive AI systems and increasingly more capable generative AI systems. I'm doing a project right now with the journalist Julia Anglin on AI and elections, chatbot and elections, and some of the information is just flat wrong, actually, and potentially harmful and discriminatory in its implications for democracy and for the vote. Article 7, all are equal before the law and entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. Article 8, everyone has the right to an effective remedy by the competent national tribunals for acts violating the fundamental rights granted him by the Constitution or law. And I was actually writing a note there about notice and consent. I was trying to think about, do you have a right to know how decisions are being made? And I thought this was an interesting way of thinking about the sort of AI black box and how to think about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a way to think through that. But I want to spend my last sort of 5 or 7 minutes on Article 27, which I think I would argue, many others have argued, and I'm relying quite a lot on the work of a legal scholar named Leah Shaver, who now she published a lot of this work as Leah Schaefer. She now writes as Leah Bishop. She's a professor of law formerly at Yale and now at Indiana University. So she's written a lot of critical works interpreting Article 27 of the UN Declaration of Human Rights, which is effectively a right to science and technology. She notes that when the international community came together to enshrine the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it was after World War II, and it was in the context of historical circumstances in which scientific research and technology had been exceedingly dangerous to many people around the world, right? Violence, torture, murder, genocide, and the like. And so Article 27, published, this was ratified in 1948, we have to imagine is very purposeful in its reflections on the kind of worst excesses of science and technology. And I think it's a very powerful potential lever for us as we're thinking about the human rights frame for AI governance. It is, this is crafted in the context of, policymakers and political leaders who had seen science used in the service of authoritarianism and advance sort of ends that were against the sort of public good, the global good. So bearing that in mind, she offers in her interpretation that a universal right or a human right to science and technology has a kind of sort of, has 4 pieces effectively. That science should have both instrumental, science and technology, and intrinsic value. So there's, it should have value in the world. It should do things in the world, hopefully good things in the world. And the intrinsic value, if you're looking at Article 27 around the right to freely participate in cultural life, like the right to participate in discovery, to be a scientist, to be a tinkerer, to be an engineer, to just know and work with science and technology. Second, she suggests that that the right to science at Article 27, her theory of Article 27, that it invokes that science and technology should have a service to humanity. Thirdly, that it should be a public good in the same way that utilities are education, healthcare are public goods, and that there should be a sort of principle or a valence of inclusivity and participation, that the general public should be able to participate and be included in conversations about science. So I'm going to wrap up with just one final slide by her that sums up some of the work that she's done. This was from an article that was published in the European Journal of Human Rights. So I would point you to that. The right to science today remains today at a very early stage of conceptualization compared to the right to education or the right to health, and even more so compared to the freedom of expression or the right to privacy. Even people deeply involved in the human rights field are frequently unaware of the existence of the right to science, which I found is true as well, much less of its meaning. Thus, the right to science is a human right whose conceptual content needs to be both recovered and further developed. And so I'm going to end there and have that as, I think, a call to action for all of us who work in the space of science and engineering, who work in the space of policy, to really think about what it would mean to leverage Article 27 as part of our policy work, and not just, I think sometimes our one of my critiques of the sort of AI for good umbrella is that it lacks specificity. Like, what does it mean? How are we going to cure cancer? Like, what are we actually going to do to make that the case using different AI tools and systems? And so I want to offer for us that we have a valuable tool here, that human rights law, that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is deeply relevant for much of the work that we are trying to do. But it's going to take us to make this principle, to Amandeep's earlier point, operationalized in the work of global governance of AI. Thank you. Do I unplug it? Carl, do I unplug? Unplug, okay. Thank you.
All right, as we get organized, is this working? Yes, it is. All right. Okay, so we're going to have a bit of a chat for about 20 to 30 minutes, depends on how things goes. And then, as we mentioned at the beginning, we'll open it up to Q&A. This is a bit of an expectation for the next 24 hours or the next day and a half. We're going to do work. You mentioned hard work, I think 3 times, right? So this conversation is hard work, and so we'll be inspired by thought leaders. We'll all, write down some ideas that are relevant to the role we're playing. But ideally, this is going to be a very dynamic exchange. And so as we talk, if something comes up, please feel free to use Slido. That's option 1, and you have the information in your little booklet. And I'll give you a signal when it's time to maybe show up at the mic if that's how you wish to ask your questions. Know that we try to be very EDI conscious when we give the mic to people. So it's possible that it won't be first come, first serve. I might say, oh, I'm curious to see what you have to say. Would you mind coming to the mic? So just know it's not about you. It's just about how we like to do things around here. All right. So Yashwa Benjo, welcome to the stage. Amandeep, Alondra, thank you so much for your opening remarks. I want to give you the mic first because we haven't heard your voice yet, and that feels like maybe this is Mila, this is your institute. You might have a few things you want to say, and I'm certain reactions. He's been taking notes on his phone, so to what has already been tabled in the very early stages of this event.
Merci Valérie. Bienvenue à tous. Ça fait vraiment plaisir de pouvoir recevoir cet événement. Thanks for all who came here for this. It's such an important topic, in my opinion, in my heart. So let me try to connect with some of the things you've said and the question about human rights of this meeting. So I've been focusing a lot over the last year on the question of, let's say, right to life, liberty, and security, as you mentioned. but it's a lot of what I've been thinking about is very much connected to the right to democracy, because the way I see it, AI, we are just seeing the tip of the iceberg, but it's going to come out of the water. There's a trend in advances that's very unlikely to stop because of the, $100 billion already invested or something. And whoever's going to control those systems is going to have a lot of power. And that's going to attract companies, military organizations, terrorists. Humans are, attracted to power like honey or something. And of course, as we all know, democracy is about sharing power. So there, we're going to build these systems that are going to give whoever controls them huge power. There is a problem. So if we want we the people to continue to have a meaning in the coming years and decades, we really have to think hard about how we're going to rein in that power to avoid that, it ends up really, destroying maybe the soul of what democracy is about. And practically, I mean, what I've been thinking about in the last year is we're going to really need to reinvent democratic institutions and international institutions, multilateral institutions to govern that power, to make sure that it, if it ends up in a few places, because the future AI systems are going to be even more compute intensive and energy intensive than the ones that we see today, we need to make sure that the governance of these systems is going to involve all the voices, including the Global South, very important. Why, you might ask? Well, there are lots of good reasons, but I only have a few minutes and I'm speaking too much. So this question of governance and having a trusted oversight is going to be important also for geopolitical reasons, because if we're not careful, it's not just a question of, okay, who grabs that power, but also that we can destroy each other using AI eventually as a weapon, or destroy all of us because we lose control and we create beasts that are smarter than us and that we don't know yet. We don't know the science of building future AI systems that will not turn against humans. So these are very serious questions, and I think it was what you quoted from Martin Luther King that made me think about the mismatch between the rate at which the science is moving and the rate at which our wisdom, our collective wisdom, which includes our institutions and norms, is progressing. So we need to get running on this. And yeah, I mean, my last words are about this lack of understanding of the science. So now I'm talking as a scientist, an AI scientist, that as I said, we don't know how to build an AI that will be safe, and we don't even understand how the current systems work. I mean, we know the math that drives the equations and so on, but we don't understand it in ways that would, make it safe or tell us, are bad things going to happen, or we should be okay and we can just go and grab the benefits. We don't know. There's nobody knows. Of course, you have scientists who say one thing and others who say another thing, but if you're not one of these people who feel that kind of confidence, then you shouldn't. You should just think, okay, so collectively we don't know. And it could be really bad or really good. So we need caution. That's what wisdom is about. We're in front of something that could be incredibly good or incredibly bad. Well, we need caution, and we can't listen to individual voices because humans can be very stubborn, and we need to. That's what democracy is about, checks and balances, right? It's about, okay, so we're gonna have a committee, we're gonna have a group, and we're gonna try to find something that most in the group find reasonable and acceptable. So that's what being cautious is also from a scientific perspective. I like to use the term Bayesian. It means the same thing as having a committee, and we kind of listen to all the voices, and if there's a danger, in fact, we listen to the most careful voice if we're not sure, right? Okay, I'll stop here. Oh no, one last thing, sorry.
No, go ahead.
So in the AI community, there's been, and there is to some extent still, multiple camps that you may have heard about. And there are people who worry more about the short-term harms that we already know have been studied, exist, matter, and involve human rights in big ways. And there are people who are more worried about the longer-term harms. So I want to say two things. One is it's harms. It's about humans, and we need regulation, treaties, norms, wisdom to deal with that. It's same goal here. And of course, there's another camp that doesn't want any regulation and anything that's going to slow down profit maximization. But there's another, like, more technical connection between the short-term and the long-term harm, which is related to this notion, which in AI we call alignment, which is about basically how do we build AI systems that will behave in a moral way, that will not harm people, that will do the right thing from the point of view of our norms and values. And of course, it is this scientific question, which is open, it is relevant to both the short-term harms and the long-term harms. And we need to invest in research to try to figure that out quickly.
Because you ended on that note, I want to share that there was a moment in the past year where Yoshua was struggling with this question of how do we get the AI to do the right thing? And he read the UN Declaration of Human Rights, and then he just had a moment. He's like, oh, if only we could program that into the AI, then we'd be fine, right? Which aspirationally seems in the right direction.
And I was so awed by the document. I thought, wow, all of these countries signed this? Wow. We should all read it again if you haven't. I mean,
Which brings me a bit to a topic you've all touched upon. So independently of our perspectives, we're at an inflection point. Some would say we've tipped into a new era. There's no going back to like the world before AI, both the possibilities and the perils. We talk about reinvention, rethinking. We need to do things differently. Earlier today, Amandeep, we were talking about what can we draw in terms of insights from what we did well and not so well with nuclear. You spoke very eloquently about, there are moments in time where the international community has come together and has made these agreements and these strong statements. So can you each speak a bit about, because it does feel like if we're all here today, is a growing number of people and important people are saying, okay, we're at this point in time, and it's way too big for any single nation, organization, person, right? So can we get more precise around, like, what's the role of the AI scientist? What is the role of an international governing body like the UN? What is the role of government, for example, in your role in the US government, but more generally of social sciences and all these other disciplines coming together? Like, I think that would be helpful because it really feels like it's going to be that interdisciplinarity that's going to be part of the key going forward. Maybe Amandeep, do you want to get us started?
I think this kind of redefinition of roles is going to be interesting and important. And your question precisely about, governments have a duty to uphold the public interest. So regardless of the political system that you may have, there is a kind of contract that they have the governments get the authority to wield violence in some ways, and they get the monopoly of that. And then, we cede that to them, and then in return, we expect something. So there is that role, and that role is going to come under stress, and we would need to build capacity. So we've spoken of, some wise women and men today, Martin Luther King. I was seeing a Wilson, and this gap, the Paleolithic mind, the medieval institutions, and godlike technology. So the medieval institutions and the institutional players would have to step up their games. We need to build their capacity. And then I think scientists have a very, very important role today, because without them, there is no technology development, and without them, there is no way, as Yoshua was pointing out, of understanding where the gaps are and building the kind of systems that we might need for the future. There is today no commercial interest in that. Why would people worry about hypothetical scenarios when there's no money to be made there? But talking about threats to democracy, so look at the way how these devices have captured our attention, because they make life easy for you. I'm cognitively and otherwise lazy human beings. So democracy, you can imagine a future and say, why do you actually need to go to vote? Because we know how you're going to vote. Aren't you going to vote like this? I can tell you from these data points. And yes, that's right. So therefore, we've already counted your vote. You might say, oh, nice, I didn't have to get up and go somewhere. I mean, these kind of scenarios, how are we going to deal with them as governments, as scientists, as civil society, without which, we don't get that honesty check, that, so how do we keep each other honest? And frankly, as you pointed out, it's a problem that is without passports. And a little gap anywhere, it's like the nuclear proliferation problem. You could try and control things in one place. You can't control it in another place. You still have a risk.
That's why we
to
need the
humanity.
UN, Amandeep.
Yes, but UN institutions, and I'm being frank here, UN institutions need to also step up, just like governments need to step up. We need to do multi-stakeholder engagement differently. We have some existing models. There are colleagues here who have worked with ICANN, IGF, Internet Governance Forum. We need to go to the next stage. The advisory body is an example of how the UN can do things differently. I'm not saying it's a great example, but we need to multiply these innovations in multilateralism and make the UN fit for purpose. And it's partly the reason why there's a summit, the future, in this September.
I would agree with much of what Amandeep said. I would add, Yoshua mentioned power. I mean, I think what's distinctive about this moment for governance is, particularly for multilateral governance, is in the case of nuclear, which is one of the examples we often talk through, a lot of those are state utilities practically or functionally, or laboratories have the kind of the sort of rare minerals or the technologies that you would need to build facilities. And so we're living with now a competitive race with companies. And a lot of the sort of treaties and arrangements we had were between states. And so I think to Amandeep's point around how to reimagine multi-sector governance and how to both have a role for companies who are driving so much of this change, and also, use what power the state has to sort of constrain or steward or shape the behavior is a very different challenge from nuclear. I think that, companies really sit here in a really profoundly different way. I think that's what we're thinking about. And then we also, continuing to think about power in markets, to the extent that we want to be able to use AI tools and systems to advance, some of the things I ended with, the public good, and broader sort of public interest, we've got market failure, right? So I guess the sort of bigger thing is that we've got this bigger kind of shift in ecosystems. I'm a professor, I've taught students, I'm a researcher. More researchers are working in industry, and you have less working in the academy, and who's going to pay for the research, who's going to fund the research to answer some of the hard questions, who's going to fund the research for products that we need to advance, an instrumental version of science and technology and its applications for the public if there's not yet a market concept there that's viable for.
And especially if you think about some of the beneficial applications that will mostly benefit developing countries,
Yes.
where it's not going to be profitable, but we really need that.
Right. So I think part of what we need to think through as an AI community that's of technologists and social scientists and the like are, maybe we sometimes need new institutions, but we need new, I think, orientations or philosophies for how we sort of govern. We need to approach the problems in, I think, very different ways, which is why I kind of am going back to these older texts to think forward sometimes, because there's just, to sort of think again about our assumptions in the current moment and what were people thinking in the past, and the same kind of, and feeling the same way, the kind of same bewilderment and sense of peril often even around the policy space, so.
Maybe as a segue, and Yasha, you can take this, but in the spirit of going back to go forward, if we look at it through the lens of social media, like if we knew then what we know today, and try to be a bit bold and provocative in our answers, like what should we have done differently? Like what should the AI community, for example, not AI, but the tech community back then, like what, because it does feel like that's the closest example we have to the kind of context we're in, you said it very well. It's not governments who control AI, it's private companies and their CEOs and their boards. So any insights we want to draw as we launch into these conversations?
Liability?
Yeah. Lack of?
Yeah, so one thing, I mean, you have to admit it was difficult to anticipate initially, but I don't think there was a very organized effort to do the social science work and the computer science work to think through what could go wrong. And in AI, we can't afford that. We're playing such a high stakes game, in my opinion, that the rule should be you have to know what you're doing before you do it. That, in other words, companies should be demonstrating to the public or its representatives that their systems are not going to harm people before they even deploy them or even before they build them. I know we're not there yet in terms of regulation, but in my opinion, this is where we should go. As we move towards more and more powerful systems, we approach AGI or something, you know, very capable systems that could outsmart us in some ways. It's going to become imperative that the level of caution also increases to the point where governments or, you know, multilateral organizations that have a voice and a say can just say, no, this is not, we don't know, I mean, there's not enough evidence that this is going to be okay, that it's going to be safe, that it's not going to create terrible outcomes. But we didn't do that for social media. It's just that now we can't play that same
The stakes are
story.
higher.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we allowed ourselves to be focused on content issues, whereas we should have focused on the predictive engines, for instance. And we also did not, when it came to, let's say, the cross-border impact. For example, social media platforms today, most of the users are in the global south or the global majority. But we didn't ask the hard social science questions around the impact and saying, okay, if that's where your users are, how much of your resources around content moderation, for instance, again, content moderation, we've been brainwashed into this, are you deploying in the global south? You know, very little. So we didn't ask those hard questions at that time. And we got kind of sidetracked in this. Everyone will have an internet page. You know, it's freedom of expression. It is openness, and we didn't focus on the business model behind that. And frankly, I see similar things happening today with AI. I think safety and excessive focus on safety, the industry, well, do it. So I skipped a word, you can add that. That has to be done. That's the industry's responsibility. Engineers don't build bridges that don't conform to certain safety assessment. You know, you'll never get a license as an architect or as a civil engineer if you do stuff like that.
Depends in which country.
Yeah, that of course, you know. But I think we are allowing again ourselves to be misled in some ways, you know, shining bright things. And so we shouldn't repeat what happened with the social media experience.
Any thoughts?
No, I mean, I don't have anything to add to what they said. I think that's exactly right.
So how do we do this well from a kind of translation interdisciplinary perspective, right? So policymakers have a language and way of seeing the world. Social scientists have a language and way of seeing the world. AI scientists have a language and way of seeing the world. I know you've been involved in quite a few projects where we do this. Each nation in the world has its own kind of lens through which it interprets everything that's happening, and that really depends on where you're positioned relative to this. So what are some clues to the things that will be important to making this work? And you've been on the front line of this in the last 12 months of just the need to translate and explain so that at a minimum there's something we can all look at that has a similar shape, and then we can start solving for it.
Yeah, just speaking from the point of view of the AI researchers, the incentives are just not there for them to spend time on public policy or even just like reading about the potential social impact of their work. And so how do we change that? Well, I think institutions like Mila and universities have a role in educating the researchers. And in the generation of like my grad students, there's a lot of goodwill to act morally right. But there's also all that pressure, oh, we need to have more, papers, in the top venues in our field and to be recruited by the top companies who are going to pay us crazy salaries that are distorting the field. It's the incentive structure is currently not tipped in the right direction. I don't know what the right interventions are, but I think that we need to think about it and see what states can do to try to bring more young people into the questions that matter to society, to human rights, than we currently have. And that means learning something outside of your comfort zone. That means working with people who have a different language, with whom you'll probably disagree. And that means humility, and that's the engine of science, humility.
So I'm going to sound a little bit naive or like Pollyannish, but I want to believe that one of the incentives, not the only incentive, is that people care about the world and their future. I think right now they're doing in the United States and the Biden administration this sort of AI talent surge as a part of the executive order that came out at the end of last year. And what you can't offer anybody is really any kind of money. I mean, they're certainly not going to get $5 million a year or something what some of these top AI scientists are getting. I mean, the administration has been able to sort of change the salary pool a little bit, but you're probably talking about $250,000
I don't think you can get stock options of the.
Definitely no
you can't-
stock
yeah, I know,
options,
okay.
right? There will not be an IPO at the Federal Reserve, right? So, I do think that if we can have an affirmative vision for the society that we want to live in, and this is the part of me that I know is going to sound Pollyannish, that people, I mean, as having been a leader of nonprofit organization, a leader working in the White House, that people can be mobilized around mission if there is a powerful mission. I mean, this is why Mila is here. This is, that people respond to mission. I mean, they respond to $5 million a year, but they also will respond to someone who articulates for them a vision of the world. And I feel like that is our responsibility as leaders of organizations, as people, and I will say about Yoshua, to your question, Valerie, like you're a bridge builder. I mean, I don't presume to know you well. The version of you I met 6 years ago was not policymaking, Yoshua, and so.
Well, I was talking about the danger of AI advertising 10 years ago, actually.
Yes. But, I think all of us have to be willing, to your point about humility, to like sort of take that step forward. I have started in June, I started last spring at the Institute for Advanced Study, where I'm on the faculty, something called the AI Policy and Governance Working Group. And there's every camp. There's 9 camps in this working group, and the first meeting was really like, can we get everybody in a room together and they won't fight? And it was like really trying to like social engineer sort of who was going to be there and how we were going to interact. And we had a deadline and we met for a short amount of time. Because I think the passions of the camps is that people really care. They care differently and for different reasons, but there's a lot of passion that I think that needs to be, worked through and channeled. And I'm thinking, you don't want to conscript people into the AI army, but I think that you can, we've got visions of and versions of public service. I think that can be models here too.
I think the awareness raising, which hopefully this meeting is contributing to, is going to be a key to get people who would otherwise, earn millions to work for the common good. I hope it's going to work. And by the way, for governments to move and take these questions seriously, we also need the governments, but the citizens to understand the issues. And so talking to the media, explaining, having public debates, discussions, this is so central to any progress we can hope to make. And nothing is going to move until public opinion gets it. And we have to be careful because they could also get it wrong. We've seen that.
And public technology investments outside the military sphere. So I think that's a kind of check on tech power, if it is done right. And we've seen that with the digital public infrastructure experience in some countries, the use of open source digital public goods, done responsibly. But I think that's an important thing, and that many people, many scientists, they may leave the 5 million aside and go for something that is about solving the problem of plastics in the ocean and things like that, where there's no money to be made, but techs and other levers that governments have can be used to get resources into that area. Again, that's part of the grand delusion that we've been enthralled with for a while, that so I think I'm stepping into some political areas.
This last part of the conversation is making me curious if we go back to Martin Luther King and his reference to poverty of spirit. So what would we put next to that? So we're looking for, this mission-driven conversation is like raised spirit or souls, and there's something about the richness of spirit, right? We want to bring different people who'll argue and disagree, but we want that. We want that messiness, because out of that comes out, more. I'm getting curious, if it's not poverty of spirit, then what is it? What is that ingredient we need? We're going to open it up for questions, because there's a lot that's been tabled already, and I'm sure there are some people who have something they'd like to throw into the conversation. Do you want to say something?
No, just to say, so Slido, please go to Slido. We have already started to have some question up there. And and then you can just raise your hand.
Are we going around, or people get up?
Yeah,
How do you want to
no,
do it? You're going to go around?
go around.
Perfect. Okay, so raise your hand, and Anna's going to come and see you.
Who's this woman? We don't know this woman.
It works, yes. I'm Virginia Dignam. I'm a professor in AI in Sweden. I'm also a member of the UN advisory body. Thank you for the discussion. It has been very interesting so far. What I miss a bit is the issue of responsibility. We talk about systems that we don't understand, but we are dumping them into the world. Why don't we go back to the drawing board and make sure that we know and we are responsible for them?
Indeed.
We talk about the role of the institutions around, but we are very much focusing, if we are focusing on the regulation of these systems, we are talking about what you often compare to the brakes and the seat belts in the car, but we don't dare at institutional and government level to talk about the driver's license. Who is using these things? Why they are using these things? What can we demand from those? So I do miss a little bit, and in a sense then it feels like we hope that there will be technological solution that will solve all these problems for us, and all of a sudden then we all can live happily with AI. But we are not really daring, first for the responsibility, but also for the accepting that there is no technological solution. We need really to look at the combination of social and technological and institutional issues, and not hope for the next work of Joshua that will solve it all technologically.
I do. But realistically, you're right. It's first a political question. But the question I don't know how to answer is like the realpolitik. It's not enough to say, okay, so this is where we want to go, and we need to talk about that. But how do we move the needle?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just add that, of course I agree with you, but I think that we also have, part of what's hard right now is that part of what the disruption economy intends to do is skirt responsibility. It's actually part of the mission of disruptive innovation as a business model. And so it's one thing to say, this is to Yoshua's point about realpolitik, you know, companies should tell us whether they're about to release this thing and it should be tested and there should be all the pre-deployment. But if the incentive is to release it before your competitor releases it, not give anybody an advance notice, not spend the money, you know, to test it, you know, and then you get rewarded with magazine covers and things for being, you know, it is just the whole ecosystem of incentives is like against responsibility in a certain kind of way that I think we've just got to, you know, reckon with. And I think the question, sometimes our questions around responsibility harken back to a world that we're no longer living in, at least a political economy that we're not living in. And so I want to think about how to try to compel responsibility for a new moment in which skirting it is actually the modus operandi of technology companies. No, yeah, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying from a policymaker's perspective or from political perspective, you know, how do we need to think about reframing the issue? I don't have any answers, but I just think that we're, yeah.
Well, but I just want to mention something. So in my discussions with politicians or people in the public policy sphere, even if they believe my arguments and I'm saying, hey, we need to go there, the next question they ask is, well, how do we, you know, how do we do it in a way that the public is going to like it and want to elect us again? And so we're back to
Incentives.
Yep. How do we make sure people understand the gravity of what is going on and then are willing to go back to when we were doing the right things in terms of government intervention?
And to all those, we have the time horizon, like externalities, responsibility for externalities, you know, mental health of children, you know, societal impact. It gets so diluted. So people take the cream of the economic value and then they leave the externalities, whether they are on peace and security, human rights, to be handled by families, individuals. The same thing happened with health, you know. I mean, if you are eating too much sugar, that's your problem. You know, it's not, you know, so it's this dilution of responsibility. This is what we have to try and catch through very sharp social science research, multidisciplinary perspectives, and then very short loops back, you know, to the policy response. And this is where we also have to cut off, because the governments will say, I also have responsibility to ensure that, you know, country X, my competitor, doesn't leave us behind. I also have a responsibility on Y, Z, and something. So how do we kind of, you know, deal with those competing responsibilities? I think that's a big problem today, because the companies smell this. You know, the governments are not going to be harsh on them because they are also in a race. You know, the companies are in a race, but the governments are also. So that's being instrumentalized, and I think there is no easy answer to it, but we have to kind of, you know, highlight, sharpen the framing of the other responsibilities that government have. That's why, you know, in the advisory body's interim report, you have this section on public interest. You know, there's a wider lens through which you should look at the public interest.
There's some enthusiasm on Slido for, okay, well, does this bring us to maybe looking at pharmaceutical companies and how we were able to reconcile innovation and protecting people and giving the proper role and responsibility to government? Not that we did everything right, but anyways.
Are we talking about Canadian healthcare or American? Because we'll have to ask what country.
Yeah. So I think with, you know, we go back to social media and nuclear, I think we're all looking for, like, are there some elements of insight and answer we can bring into the complexity of the moment we're in to just give us a bit of structure to start looking at it? Any reactions to pharmaceutical? Yes, no?
The pharmaceutical example is, not a positive one, I don't think. I mean, I think that there's a lot of corruption. There's a lot of the science is bad, right? So there's people paying to publish papers or publishing papers that are really just on behalf of industry to advance that. I mean, we've got challenges around the public good, around drugs, depending on what drug it is and what public health system you're in and what country you're in. So it's not a great example. I mean, it's a good example in the sense that it's a very industry-led example. So there's a lot of industry research, there's a lot of industry labs in addition to being academic labs. It's an interesting example in the regulatory in the US because you've got bodies like the FDA that have, vast array of kind of regulatory powers with regards to the release of pharmaceuticals. But you also have things like here and in the US, the opioid crisis, because people are allowed to, relabel drugs and, so yeah, I mean, so I think we need to think about all of the analogies, but it's likely that they're all imperfect in some way.
There's a good aspect of the process for regulating drugs, like at the FDA and elsewhere, which is the government is demanding scientific evidence that the drug is not toxic.
And the companies have to pay for the evidence and provide it to government.
And by the way,
Yeah.
they spend a lot of money on that, maybe the majority of the costs. And we don't even have that for AI.
Yes, and since we are in Montreal, we can also think of civil aviation as an
Yeah.
example. There's something to be learned from all of these, but AI is in some ways, it's we'll have to do a bespoke response.
Any questions in the room? Oh, Anna, you get to figure this one out.
You're too close.
Thanks very much, speakers. Emmanuel is my name, and I'm a PhD student in environmental science at the University of Toronto. I'm here just seeking opportunities to explore potentials for AI in advancing equitable and just climate transitions. So that's why I'm here, and I'm hoping that Mila would continue to champion that interdisciplinarity, which we spoke about earlier. I guess my question is around, because we had a pre-conference workshop earlier where we had fantastic chats, and we talked about some of the tensions and trade-offs that occur. For example, as you try to advance inclusion in AI technologies, you might, for example, trade off, model performance. Those are not my words, but some of the things that came out in our conversation. And even some of the speakers here today, I think you mentioned competing interests, Mr. Sandeep. And I think Professor Yeshua, you talked about, potential trade-offs in, for example, rolling out AI to the global south in cases where that is not financially sustainable. Those are tensions, right? Those are trade-offs. I was just wondering, in fact, there was also another conversation around, when you bring multiple people, multiple groups into a room, and they have different lenses in which they see the world. I think it was your point, Valerie. Those are tensions still, right? Do we have a framework for thinking about how do we navigate these tensions, these trade-offs? Are we thinking about that, for example? Because these are not technological questions, right? How do we begin to navigate and unpack some of these tensions and trade-offs? Just for the food for thought.
In my corner of the woods, we talk about game theory. I'm sure in social sciences we use maybe a different angle, but yeah, these tensions. I'm mostly worried about the tragedy of the commons here that we implicitly talked about earlier. And if you think about things like tragedy of the commons, how do we know how to get out of it, right? You have to step back. You have to consider not just this turn of the game, but okay, what's going to happen 10 turns down? And then all the players have shared interests. So, but it's not going to happen automatically. You need somebody kind of change the rules of the game to say, okay, now the reward is, average of the next 10 rewards, rather than just the next term's profits or re-election.
In its purest sense, isn't that part of the work of the UN, like elevating everyone to just the status of human being on Earth? And, in our perspective, representing our nations or our organizations, and so when we take that view, what can we all agree on? Is that still possible in the world today?
So, I mean, these trade-offs, these complexities, that's policy work at the end. In social sciences, this is policy learning. I mean, Hugh Heclo speaks about this maze in which, we are trying to coordinate, and some of the people don't even want to get out of the maze, so they don't even agree on the definition of the problem, but we still do it. So at every level, this is, and at the international level, this is about diplomacy. So you often have, in fact, Oppenheimer talked of scorpions in a bottle, but you have in a room 50 to 60 countries in the Conference on Disarmament. They pretty much don't agree on anything at all. But sometimes, you manage to create a situation in which you get work done. So that's creativity in diplomacy. And I think that's also patience and persistence, because you can't give up on these things. Can you give up on climate change or nuclear disarmament or good governance of AI? We cannot. So at every level, we have to raise. And I think it comes back to your first slide, the Nobel Prize lecture. I think at the end of the day, we've been lazy on our own development. We become very narrow in terms of expertise. And so Mila is a counter-example. So I think we have to work harder. I mean, someone, I think, wrote in the chat, K-12, what's the strategy there? I think if this is there in the long run with us, I think we have to kind of build up human beings, empower human beings, educate human beings differently. The spiritual, moral side of the question, otherwise we'll get deluded and agency gets diluted. And then we end up somewhere where we didn't want to be.
I wanted to come back to the public, which has been mentioned a few times, because I do think, Valerie, you said earlier that we're at an inflection point. I think part of that inflection point is that the public is part of the conversation. So, I think when large language models were introduced to the public, those of us who work in the AI space broadly, whether or not you're a scientist or a policy person or whatever, you sort of in 24 hours went from working on a topic that no one in your life cared about, or other than people who to everyone wanting to talk to you about it. And I think I'm looking at this sort of bottom question on the Slido, I think, or no, the third one, is it necessary to instill fear? I hope that we are coming out of that manic hype fear, but if there's an upside to that, and there's many downsides, it is that we can have a broader public conversation that we could not have had 2 years ago about some of these issues. And we still need to, I think, get, one of the things I try to do in my work as an academic is to be clear that you can always convey in some capacity, your point, talking to the media, talking to people, to the general public, the stakes of what these issues are, what the technology is. They don't have to be an AI scientist to really understand that these are powerful tools, potentially dangerous, will impact their work, will impact the environment, will impact their lives. And so I think, that's a really important part of the work that we all have to do. It's also, I think, why we're deeply committed in the UN work to doing all of these public engagements, and to doing a report, an interim report that was kind of plainly stated. I mean, it's not deeply technical. It's intended to have a broad audience. I think it was translated into many languages, deep. And so there's a lot of work that the, government can put some, if the ecosystem can put some check on companies, but fundamentally the public consumes the products on the company side, right? And so if consumers are educated around products and can make different choices or to make demands of companies, that's also a powerful lever here that we really need to help to activate by really helping the public understand the stakes.
And they elect government, right? And there are a few questions here around okay, but if we're trusting government so much to take action, is the government trustworthy? Just to anchor something you said for everyone, because there is something particular in the public interest for this conversation, very quickly. We've estimated that there have been 450 billion views of articles or interviews with Jeff Hinton or Yoshua Bengio in the last 12 months. That's a lot. Like, these guys are cool, but we're talking AI. This is not Taylor Swift, right? 450 billion views worldwide of people saying, oh, this Hinton guy is saying something about AI. This Bengio guy is saying, maybe...
So he's not the godfather of AI, he's the Taylor Swift of
it's
AI.
It's the Taylor Swift of AI. We might keep that. But just to give it an image, like, wow, that's a bit of the light of it. Like, so many people are engaging with the topic, right? The emotions tied to it vary, but they're like, I think I need to get smart about this. Very different. Any reactions? And we're wrapping up, so I'll let you react. Oh, actually, I had a question I want to ask, but any reactions to, like, but can we even trust government? And this is a particular moment in geopolitics, let's put it that way.
Well, we have to trust government and also not trust them.
Trust them and not trust them.
Yes, because they are the only ones who are like representing some collective decision-making process, and they can also screw up. And so multilateral, agreements is one thing. Having, in my opinion, for example, the boards of these companies should have multiple stakeholders, including but not only governments, civil society, academics, international community representatives. We need to be robust in our institutions to, all of the bad things that can happen.
Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify. So I think all that comes with it, audits and transparency and earning trust and keeping trust. So I think it can't be a one-shot thing. I've given you a certificate of trust. It has to be earned on a regular basis.
And governments will have to step up to this greater challenge, right? Okay, final question. You get to pick, I'm going to ask 2 questions, but you each have to answer one of the 2 questions. So option A, one hope for the next 2 days for this conference. Option B, one thing you'd like to see happen in 2024. So we meet again here in 2025 and you say, you remember I said this needed to happen this year, it happened, I'm so happy about that. I know it's a tough question.
I'm going to go for B.
Yes.
I said it earlier, collective awareness of the potential for harm of these powerful technologies is going to be key, and hopefully this year, it's been amazing last year actually, but it's not enough. We're not there yet at the inflection point that will make the actors, companies, governments, international community do enough of the right things fast enough, but it could happen.
I think getting to some decisions, because we have spent a lot of time on analysis, that's very important. We understand some. We still need to keep at it because things change, but we also need to decide. We need to start building some things. Some things will work, others won't. There will be a Darwinian winnowing of the institutional responses, but we need to start. I think this could be the year when we start.
I think, yes, we need to operationalize all of these principles and begin to build the infrastructure and institutions we need to carry this out. So, part of it, the issue sits with the research community or with the policymaking and government community. Like, are we going to build AI safety institutes that, allow, us to sort of govern these technologies, not just on the technical side. I mean, when I saw the 2 of you last, we were at the AI Safety Summit, and the argument that I made there in that small room was that if we're going to build new institutions, they need to be imagined as democratic institutions, right? So that they need to include the public in the way that we're designing them, that if we're thinking about technical systems, we need to take a socio-technical approach. It shouldn't just be a technical approach to safety and trust to that extent. So I think we need that as well. And we need to, more research into, if there are benefits, prove it. Show, I sit in rooms and people say, well, it's going to do X thing or Y thing, and I'm not sure that's the case. I think there's some powerful agricultural technology examples and there might be some market challenges around who they would most benefit and who's going to pay for them. But it makes it easier to write a cover letter for a job, and it makes it easier for a lot of first world problems of like work, paperwork we don't want to do. But if we really are serious about what benefits they might do, I hope that people are challenged to actually demonstrate that's the case.
We're out of time. I know this is completely unfair with the richness of all the perspectives you're bringing, but thank you to each of you. Thank you so much. This was the appetizer for the conference, everyone. Merci.
And now it's my pleasure to just invite you to take a glass of wine or water. There are some bites as well to eat, and the only thing, please do remember to bring your name tag with you tomorrow morning again. Otherwise, we won't let you in. So please bring it back, and yeah, enjoy the networking and the conversations. 8:30, yes. We start at 9, breakfast at 8:30.